Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. So, wherever you're joining us again, whether that be California, Florida, Wisconsin, wherever it is, we just want to say thank you for joining us and working through these really difficult texts. And I know sometimes we'll delve into a text and you're thinking, where are we going with this? Right? It's just a bunch of names, or it's just this daughter giving birth to this daughter and them competing like we did last week. But there's always something interesting when you delve deep enough. And so here at Ethos, we always take time to study the text responsibly, which means, again, we're asking questions. Right? We spend so much time looking at so many different rabbinical writings. The people who actually wrote this have scholars, Jewish scholars, who wrote about these pieces thousands of years before we've even picked it up. And so we approach it that way. We ask, what did their writers, what did their philosophers, their rabbis, what did they say about the text first? Because that's the responsible thing to do. And afterwards, then we begin to apply. Right? We look at what the original language meant, the audience, all of it, and we say, now what do we do with the text? But only after we've looked at it through a responsible lens. And so today we continue moving through the book of Genesis. And again, Genesis, not a history book, right? Not a history book, not set up to have literal dates and times and sequences set up, but stories to remind them of their identity in the middle of Babylonian captivity. It's a reminder that this is who we are and this is who we aren't, right? And so for Israelites, for these Jewish people in the middle of Babylonian captivity, 587 BC, they tell the stories of Jacob, of Abraham. They tell those stories, right? When they are when they find themselves in the middle of captivity in Mesopotamia, when I say that, Rome, wherever, they're going to have bits and pieces about Daniel, right? When they're in the middle of Roman occupation, Daniel in the lion's den in Babylon becomes the story, right? So it's just like this. For them, they're looking back at their stories, their rituals, their traditions. They're telling this in order to help them through Babylonian captivity. They're trying to hold on to their ritual, their story. They are not going to assimilate to Babylonian ways. They're not going to take on Babylonian gods. And the way to do it is to retell our stories, right? Remember how we keep Judaism Jewish, right? Keeping it kosher, one might say, if you're a Jew. And so all of this is a reminder that everywhere in the story, Israel is going to see themselves. And so every character, every story, Israel sees themselves miniaturized through these different tellings. And again, that's really important. So today, we're going to move through Genesis chapter 30, 25 through 36. So again, it's 10 verses or so, but we're going to move through them and find some really interesting things today, especially if you remember, if you know where we're going today, interesting stories about some goat mating rituals, right? There's some interesting goat mating rituals in this section that I find really fascinating. And when you delve deep enough, you understand why it's so funny to a Jew. And why I find it hilarious now reading it. So let's delve in though. Remember, Jacob and Esau, these are two individuals who, again, remind Israel of the higher and the lower self, right? They remind them of Jacob is the one that studies. He's taking time, energy to understand the blessing of Torah, whereas Esau just gives it away, right, for soup. And so the idea is who are we going to be, Israel? Are we going to be the nation that understands, respects, and upholds the blessing, or are we going to be one that wastes it away like Esau? Good. So here we go. Let's delve right into the chapter. Here we go. Verse 25. Here we go. It came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away, and I'll go to my place and to my land." So again, think about this. It's all set up. He's having kids. Things are blowing up. Right? And the question is, do we stay here with dad forever, Rachel and Leah, or do we go and do our own thing? Do we build our own home? Do we build our own nation? What do we do? The response is this section in the story. And so he says, "Give me my wives and my children, for whom I worked for you, and I will go, for you know my work, which I have worked for you." And Laban said to him, "If only I have now found favor in your eyes. I have divined, and the Lord has blessed me for your sake." So Laban is recognizing he's been blessed because of Jacob. But he doesn't want to let Jacob go, does he? Then he said, "Specify your wages for me, and I'll give them." So he wants to pay Jacob basically to keep him there. Then he said, "Specify your wages for me, I'll give them." And he said to him, "You know how I have worked for you and how your livestock was with me." Jacob's reminding him, "Look, you know, I've done a very good job for you. Under me, you have multiplied," right? So he says, "For the little that you had before me has increased in multitude, and the Lord bless you upon my arrival. But now, when will I too provide something for my household?" So he's saying, "Look, Laban, I need to get out. I need to be providing for my family now. You have done that. You gave me the opportunity, and I blessed you. Now it's time for me to do the work and bless me and my family," right? And he said, "What shall I give you?" Jacob said, "You shall give me nothing. If you do this thing for me," here it is, "I will return, I will pasture your flocks, and I will watch them. I will pass throughout all your flocks today, removing from there every speckled and spotted kid, and every brown lamb among the sheep, and every spotted and speckled one from among the goats. And this shall be my wages." Interesting. "And my righteousness will testify for me at a future date, for it will come upon my wages before you. Whatever is not speckled or spotted among the goats, or brown among the sheep, shall be counted as stolen with me." And Laban said, "Very well, if only it will be as you say." So again, if any of them, if you find any white ones with me, as far as the sheep goes, those are yours, right? And he removed on that day the ringed and the spotted male goats, and all the speckled and spotted female goats, whichever had white on it, and all the brown from among the sheep, and he gave them into the hands of his sons. Good. And he set 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob tended Laban's remaining animals. So again, there's a division here, right? A division of the sheep. Jacob gets a small amount, Laban keeps the larger. And Jacob took for himself moist rods of trembling poplar and hazelnut and chestnut, and he peeled white streaks upon them, bearing the white that was on the rods. And he thrust the rods that he had peeled into the gutters and the watering troughs where the animals would drink, the opposite the other animals, that they would come into heat when they came to drink. And the flocks came into heat by the rods, and the animals bore ringed, spotted, and striped young. And Jacob separated the sheep, and he turned the faces of the animals toward the ringed ones, and every brown one among Laban's animals, and he made himself flocks by himself, and he did not place them with Laban's animals. And it came to pass that whenever the animals that were bearing their first would come into the heat, Jacob would place the rods in the troughs before the eyes of the animals, in order to bring them into heat by means of the rods. But if the animals would delay, he would not place them, so that the ones that delayed were Laban's, and the ones that bore their first became Jacob's. And the man became exceedingly wealthy, and he had prolific animals, and the maidservants and the manservants and the camels and the donkeys. So, weird story, right? Odd goat and sheep mating rituals. Somehow this plays out to his favor. He grows, he gains the blessing, right? But there's something deeper going on. So notice this again, Jacob. Jacob has Joseph. So right from the get-go, we're reminded Joseph is going to be the one that frees his family, right? Jacob here kind of does the Joseph thing, doesn't he? Jacob is about to free his family from Laban. And so it's really interesting to see this connection if you're a Jewish person reading it. You read about the son Joseph, who you know the story, and yet Jacob is about to go and do the thing. He's getting tired of being in his shady father-in-law's house and watching his father prosper over Jacob and his family. But again, it's a reminder of the exile, right? It's a reminder of Egypt and Babylon, how they are these people, right? They're these people who are living in Babylonian, Egyptian captivity. Israelites over and over again. They're working so hard. They're giving all of their time, their energy, their resources to these empires, and they're watching these empires build themselves on the back of their work. This is difficult for Israel. So when Israel reads about Jacob saying, "Look, I got to go," right? I've prospered you. Let me go. Let my people go, Pharaoh. Right? That's what's going on in Egypt. Let my people go, Pharaoh. We have built this thing for you. Let us go. Isn't it time to let us go? Haven't we done enough for your people? Let us prosper now. When an Israelite, a Jewish person reads this of Jacob, they make an immediate connection. It's not necessarily that Jacob is feeling swindled. It's more of Jacob has worked so hard. Israel has worked so hard for that empire. Instead of cursing that empire, they have chosen to bless the empire, be a blessing to their enemies. And now they're asking their enemies, will you allow us to go and live our lives now? Yeah, so interesting. Already from the get-go, you can see when you look at it through that perspective, it makes perfect sense. There's really something heavy going on there. And so Joseph, right? Joseph will be the one that takes his family from famine into prosperity. Joseph, right? Joseph the son, and his father Jacob is about to do the same thing. He's about to bring his family out of captivity. Laban's captivity, right? Yeah, you get it. All right, so verse 28, notice this. Specify your wages for me, and I'll give them to you. So notice Laban, he's forced to recognize Jacob's worth. He's forced to recognize Jacob, he can't continue exploiting him anymore. But here's one thing. Jacob, he's finally understanding his worth. He's finally understanding, I have done all of these things. I've actually been a blessing. I have worth. When you are a slave means to forget your worth. Jacob, like Israel, realizes we have worth. We are made in the divine image of God. And we have worth. I love this. When you recognize your worth, you are no longer a prisoner to fear, right? Jacob no longer needs to stay. He understands he's always been free, right? He's always been worthy. I have a friend, he's kind of been moving through this deconstruction process. And he said, you know what? I'm moving through that atonement theology that you talk about so often. And he said, I've realized God has never been up there looking down on me, taking note of all of the things I'm doing. He said, a God like that has way too much time on their hands. When there is so much pain and brokenness going on in the world, and this God is upset with me because I told a white lie to my neighbor? Really? And he's holding it against me? And only if I ask for forgiveness is he going to forgive me? He said, the whole thing seemed so convoluted. And he said, I started to feel worse and worse about myself. But he said, once I realized that God is not holding anything against me, God is actually for me, not against me. He said, when I realized I don't need approval from anyone because I know my worth. He said, when I understood that, when I understood I already have approval and worth here, I can see it in myself. He said, that's when I saw it the most from other people. When I knew I no longer needed it. It's when I got it. And so I love this idea that Jacob recognizes his own worth and he says, you know what? It's time to go. It's time to go. I am not a slave. I'm no longer a slave. I am free. In fact, I've always been free. But when you recognize it, there is an exodus. And so Jacob recognizes his worth. And now once he recognizes his worth, he can now exit captivity, right? He can leave and move into freedom, establish a new kind of life for he and his family. Beautiful. Goes on, verse 31. You shall give me nothing. If you do this thing for me, I will return. I will pasture your flocks and I will watch them. So Jacob is being a little crafty here. If you read the text there, Jacob's being crafty. He's kind of setting his own trap. And so Jewish literature has Jacob kind of as the hero in most of the interpretations, right? Because he understood Torah, right? He understood things of worth. And so he's basically laying the ground for not just a plan, but for his people, right? He's crafty. He's cunning. He understands his worth. He understands how to manipulate the whole thing toward his people in his favor, right? It's not as deceptive. It's more of, I understand my family and our worth. And we will not continue living under Babylonian rule anymore. We've done everything we can to help you prosper. And now we understand our worth and we're asking to leave, right? And there's a crafty plan of how to get out. Just like Moses, it was a crafty, interesting way, right? God finds this way for his people. There's this path, right? It's beautiful. And so it continues. Here's the plan. And the plan seems so odd, doesn't it? It's a very odd story when you think about it. I will pass throughout your flocks, removing from there every speckled, spotted kid, every brown lamb. So again, very weird, right? He's going to take all of the spotted, speckled animals and the brown animals that are sheep. He's going to take them. And so odd, right? Laban, he immediately sees this is going to work in his favor. And anyone else reading this story would have thought the same, because here's the thing. Historically, we know this. Read this quote with me. Normally, goats in that land were black or dark brown, seldom white or spotted with white. Yeah, you can see why Laban's like licking his chops. Oh, this is a good deal for me. On the other hand, the sheep were nearly always white, infrequently black or spotted. Jacob offered to continue working as a tender of the flocks if he were but to receive the rare of the offspring. You see it now. So again, on the surface, this would have been a steal for Laban. And anyone reading this during that culture would have been like, oh no, Jacob, what are you thinking? Right? Anyone cunning, conniving, any empire that's focused on building their own is going to say, I'm jumping at this opportunity, right? I'm going to steal more time from Jacob. That's what they're thinking. But here's the thing. He doesn't know about Jacob's special goat mating ritual, does he? Again, it's a story, right? It's an odd story. And so the story, again, he sets up these rods, and it somehow attracts the goats, and the goats show up, and it's only certain kind of goats. And when they're in heat, they have certain kind of spotted ones as opposed to only white ones. And it's weird. It's convoluted. There have been farmers. It's so funny when you read some of the commentary on this. There have been farmers who have actually tried this. And do you know what the answer was? The result? Yeah, didn't work. It didn't work because it doesn't work. It was a wives' tale. It was kind of a funny, tongue-in-cheek story, right? That they told. It was a tongue-in-cheek story, just like many of us will hear today. These kind of odd, funny stories. Oh yeah, put a toad on it, or whatever. Lick a toad and you'll feel better. I don't know. Weird stories, right? This was not meant to be literal. The idea here is something far more profound. The idea here at the very end, 43, and the man became exceedingly wealthy, and he had prolific animals and maidservants and manservants and camels and donkeys. Jacob prospers. Watch this now. Jacob prospers in an unlikely way, because this is how the divine works. Jacob prospers in an unlikely way. I love this. When man's ways have been exhausted, the divine can work fully. And when Yahweh does, it can only be because of Yahweh. I love that idea. That was from Rashi. All right. What a beautiful message for Israel. First off, right? Israel, you can pound dirt. You can revolt violently. You can become like all the other nations. You can do all of these things to try to gain your freedom, to experience kingdom of heaven, right? You can do all those things. But once you're done, right? Once you've done that stuff, it's then that the divine says, okay, you ready now? Let me show you the real path to freedom now. Right? The one you longed for, the one that was waiting there the entire time. I'm going to do it in such a fashion that when you look back, you realize, oh man, that could only have been a divine thing. I thought it was going to be because of this or this or this. But no, the divine says, no, no, no. Let me show you. I have a different way. And it's going to be so miraculous, so beautiful, something you never thought about before. And when it happens, you're going to say it was a divine thing. And I didn't even think about it. I was so caught up here in my head, thinking about all the ways I was going to make this work that I didn't even consider it could possibly have been answered that way. That's the message here of this goat mating ritual story. I have a friend, he was going through some tremendous amount of stress, hated his job. He was in so much stress. He said he was oftentimes puking, right? He was in front of the toilet puking from all of the stress, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. He was going through so much pain. His marriage was falling apart. He hated this job. And so he said he started applying everywhere, trying to get anything he could, right? Because anything could be better than that job. Anything could be better for working for him, the boss, right? And so my friend said he applied so many different places and no one wanted him. And then one place showed up and he actually didn't have a very good feeling about it. But he told himself, you know what? I got to get out. I've got to get out of this thing. And so my friend, he took the job that he knew he probably shouldn't take. He knew it was basically going to go from feeling like he was in one frying pan to another. But he said he was so desperate to get out that he just jumped out of it into the next one. And he said the next one was even worse. He said this guy was even worse than the other, took more advantage of him, didn't pay him very fairly, asked him to stay longer hours. He said he was miserable. And that's about the time that my friend said he noticed a friend of his had been calling him over and over again for the past month and a half. And he kept putting his friend off. His friend said, look, I wanted to talk to you. Do you have time for me? Let's go get coffee. Let's do something. And he said, yeah, I'll do that soon. He kept putting his friend off. And so my friend, his name is Steve. Steve said, you know what? I keep putting my friend off. I might as well have coffee with him. So Steve, after work, went to the coffee shop exhausted. And he sat down with his friend. And his friend said, hey, Steve, how you doing? You don't look so good. And Steve explained the whole situation to him. How he hated the job before and how it had been so terrible, but he said he'd give anything just to go back to that one because the one he now has is even worse. And he's just explain how terrible this is and how he's feeling even worse off and how he's not sleeping again and how he's more frustrated with his wife and he's going on all of this. And the friend said, man, you know, Steve, I've been calling you. And Steve says, yeah, I know. I'm so sorry. I've just been dealing with all this. And the friend said, no, I don't think you understand, Steve. I have this opportunity for a job. I've been hoping that you'd be interested in it. At my work. We're dying for the talent that you have. And I've been holding off trying to get some people not to hire anyone yet. But Steve, it's got to happen this week. Can I put your name in? Would you put your resume in for me? And Steve sat there in silence. He said, all this time, if he had just answered the phone, right? He missed it. All this time his friend had been calling. If he had just answered the phone call, he'd been so much happier. It'd been waiting for him the whole time, but it took this and this and this to finally happen before he says, it was there the whole time. I was just not aware of it. So thankful he answered. He said he did take the job and he absolutely loves working where he's working now. But it took him finally stopping, looking, and realizing the divine was happening. He just wasn't aware of it yet. So good. Yeah, so good. Sometimes it takes a miraculous moment to pop us out of our own shell, to pop us out of our own heads, to get us to realize life is about to happen. And that's when we step into freedom. We recognize our own worth like Jacob does. We step out. And the miraculous happens, and God prospers us. Such a cool idea. So what do we do? How do we take it home? Well, I thought about this. I really am drawn to this idea in this lesson about recognizing our worth because I grew up with this idea that I am an evil, bad sinner, right? Original sin. That everything I do is always going to fall flat. And so I'm going to always have to constantly grovel to the divine that I'm a bad person, right? There's something in my DNA that I'm a sinful nature. I'm all this. But what I've learned is that we are made in the image of the divine, right? We're made of the things of the stars. And missing the mark means I'm actually aiming. I'm doing the best I can. Sometimes I miss, sometimes I make it. Sometimes I miss the target altogether. But the point is not that I'm evil, I'm bad, I'm sinful, or I'm perfect, I'm holy, I'm pure. The idea is I'm human. And so in that I can recognize I have worth, right? I have worth, and so do you. You have worth too. And I think sometimes we miss it and we fail to recognize our worth. And so if you feel unworthy, your actions will be unworthy. But if you understand you have worth, you are valuable, I would argue then you start hitting the mark even more. You start making better decisions. You start finding freedom more and more because you understand your worth. And so number one way to begin understanding, recognizing our worth is to accept thoughts, emotions, and sensations as they are. Do not put judgment on them. I'm learning this about myself. They are neutral and do not define who we are. Those thoughts, those emotions, those sensations, they rise up within us and they can be released through the body and the mind. They are fleeting in nature and they can be changed. Just because you had a thought, an idea, a sensation, an emotion doesn't mean it defines you. It just means you had an idea and maybe it wasn't a good idea. Maybe you got angry, had a bad thought about someone, whatever it was, you had it. Move on. Recognize, accept the thought, then move on. You can change your mind. Number two, eliminate should from your vocabulary. I really like this. Should comes from a place of judgment. It always has. Should comes from a place of judgment. Examine your beliefs, especially around your shoulds. So question them. What happens when you turn your shoulds into coulds, right? Does it open up other options, encourage less judgment? Consider exchanging shoulds for coulds. And if it fits your moral, your value, your value system, make it a could, right? Yeah, awesome. Number three, do not rely on other people to provide you your sense of worth. Ugh, I wish my 16-year-old self could have heard this one, right? They will inevitably disappoint you. People always do. And so we have to internalize our power to make ourselves the wielder of it, really. No label, position, or relationship can give us worth. Those are all external factors. And so we have to ensure that if something or someone is removed from our lives, our esteem is going to remain intact. I don't have to get recognized, right, to feel good about myself. I can feel good about myself without any of those externals because I know there is worth here. And so don't rely on others, that you will always be let down. Even the very best of the best, you will be let down. Don't rely on others for your worth. Lastly, take stock of your talents. Everyone has a gift, or you could call it a calling in the world, right? In fact, each of us have different abilities to help others. So we have to identify these. So if we are unsure of what those abilities are, I would say start small, right? You don't know what your talents are. What things are you good at? What do you enjoy? In what ways do we make other people's lives better? Those are the things you should begin thinking about. Maybe it's a group project. Someone's bossing you around in your part. Stand your ground. Let them know. Take stock of those talents and begin using those things. Because maybe you're that person that if someone's being bossed around, you find yourself standing up for them. Ooh, there you go. You have this ability to bring justice, to stand up for the little guy, right? Whatever the thing is, take stock of those things and let those talents begin to guide you toward the things. Right? Because once you understand you have talents, once you understand you can do certain things well, you begin to grow stronger because you know you have worth now, right? You can do things that maybe others can't. I found that over and over again has been super helpful. So I hope you can try to put those 4 things into practice. They've been really helpful for me. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us. As always, please consider giving ethos-church.org/donate. Partner with us again. We spend so much time and energy to put these out. And so we would love for you to continue helping us share these, whether it's Vimeo, YouTube, Facebook, wherever these videos find themselves often. We would ask that you consider helping us grow these videos by helping us first donate, joining us on these live Ethos Living Room discussions, and then hitting that subscribe button while you're here on YouTube would be so helpful. Everyone, thanks so much for joining us. Can't wait for you to join us next week as we delve into another really interesting story of reconciliation and shift and change with the 2 brothers. So everyone, take care. Love you. See you next week.